Hello and welcome back to the Let's Create series where we make a Roblox game. This will be the last episode of the simple obby, and today we're going to script the checkpoints so when a user touches it, they'll kind of be remembered at that checkpoint. When they fall off, or if they fall off or hit a kill part, when they respawn, they'll come back to the checkpoint. So this one has kind of a lot of scripting. I'll explain a little as we go, but this is mainly to get the game working and to get you familiar with some of these concepts of scripting. In the next game we create, we'll get into scripting pretty in depth, and I'll will do my best to explain as much as I can. But for the purposes of the simple obby, we're just going to kind of go over it a little bit, but mostly just to get the functionality working. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first thing we want to do is make the behavior that will, sort of the functionality of when the player touches a checkpoint. So this will be a checkpoint behavior, but we're not going to put it in our server script service. We're going to put it in server storage because we're going to make this a loadable script. So right next to server script storage, you'll see a plus sign. Let's click that, and we can click folder. And that'll add a folder inside server storage, and we're going to rename that loadable scripts. Loadable scripts with an S. I missed the S. We definitely want S because, there might be more than one. Currently, I think there's only going to be one, but it's okay to name it as if it holds many. So now that we have that folder there, we have it renamed. We're going to add a script, just a regular script. And we're going to rename this checkpoint behavior. Okay, and now that we have this script here, it's got a name, checkpoint behavior, and it's just your basic script. It's got print hello world, which we can delete. And then let's think about what we're going to do. So just like we did with those moving platforms and kill parts, there's going to be a script that's going to search the workspace for anything named checkpoint, which if we look at our game, that is the green platforms. And just to make sure, I'll open up workspace and I'll check like area 2, and we'll see that we have a checkpoint, and that's this first one. If we change to like the arrows, we'll see the arrows are on there. And so it's checkpoint. So if we go to our behavior, let's think about what we want to do. So this behavior isn't going to be the thing that searches through the workspace. This behavior is just going to be the actual behavior on the checkpoint. So the first thing we want to do is make sure our parent of this script is an actual checkpoint. So let's just put this in a comment and say ensure this script parent is a checkpoint. And then we'll say if not, short circuit or whatever you want to call it, but basically let's break out of the script and not execute the rest of it. So if not, short circuit and return is fine. So then we'll drop a couple lines, and then we'll get into it. So we need a function that is going to be triggered when the checkpoint is touched. So let's just say function we'll use when checkpoint is touched. All right, and then I'm going to kind of scroll this in to make it bigger so you can see it. Okay, so function we'll use when checkpoint is touched. That's what will go there. And then I'll drop a couple more lines. Then we'll say let's go ahead and connect. Let's connect our function to the touched event, and that's basically the outline of our script. So if you don't have this typed in, you can go ahead and pause, get this typed in. It's just comments, but it basically gives us the structure of what we want to do in this script. And then go ahead and go under the line for your second comment about this is the function we'll use. And we're going to go ahead and type up that function. So we'll say function. We can call it anything we want. Let's say on checkpoint touched. And it will take in something that's going to hit it, other part. We'll just call it hit. I'll come out of there and I'll press enter, and that should give me that end for free. And now that we have this function, we didn't say what it's going to do yet, but we have it outlined. And so um, down beneath the connect our function to the script, we can add our kind of like checkpoint. So we'll say, local checkpoint equals script.parent. And so what that says is this script will be a child of something. We want to check the parent of this script, and we want to make sure it's a checkpoint. That's what we're going to do after that first comment. We haven't done it yet. So we're going to say local checkpoint equals script.parent, and then we're going to say checkpoint.touched, use a colon, and then type connect, just like we've done several times. And then we'll use the name of the function we created, so on checkpoint touched. Go ahead and delete those other opening and closing parentheses and make sure you only have an opening parenthesis before the function name and a closing parenthesis after the function name. Now we've almost got the outline done. The one thing we haven't done yet is to make sure that the parent is actually a checkpoint. So instead of typing it again, local checkpoint equals, we're going to just cut this line. So local checkpoint equals script.parent. We're going to cut that and we're going to paste it up here. And so now, once we cut it and paste it, I used Control X and then Control V. You can just right click and you have an option to cut and paste. Move it up there, or just delete it and retype it is fine. But once we've captured that parent, now we can kind of check to see if it is actually a checkpoint. And so we'll say if checkpoint, which is probably not good naming because it could not be a checkpoint. We're just assuming it is. But this is where we check to make sure it actually is. So if checkpoint.name, and then to say does not equal, we'll use a tilde. So hold shift, press the button to the left of the 1 key, and that'll make a tilde. So tilde, then an equal sign, which means not equal. Then we'll use single or double quotes, your choice. And now this is case sensitive. It's got to be exactly the same as the way we named our checkpoint. And so mine is a capital C. All the rest are lowercase. So capital C, and then finish up the checkpoint. So if checkpoint.name does not equal, and then the way we spelled it, checkpoint, then we're just going to simply return. Basically, break out of this script, don't execute the rest of it. Otherwise, if the only other option is it is equal to that, right? It either is or it isn't. And so the condition of it not equaling will just return. So then after that, we can just assume it does equal it. So we've got the check at the top to make sure we have a checkpoint. We have the function kind of just declared. We haven't made it do anything yet. And then we've got the part where the section where we attach to that touched event. So last thing to do on this script is to handle what happens when a player touches a checkpoint. So first thing we need to do is make sure this player kind of has a humanoid object, which all of your players will have. And so we can do that by saying if, then we're going to use that variable that we were passed in. Hit is what I called mine. If you called yours something else, make sure you're using that. So if hit, and so we want to make sure hit exists, that it's not, just make sure it exists. And we want to make sure hit.parent exists. So hit has a parent, which if hit exists, then theoretically it would have a parent and it would be workspace. But let's just make sure hit and hit.parent and now we'll say hit.parent find first child. And so this is just going to look once. So find first child. And we're going to look for the word humanoid, which is the name of the child. So if we find all this, then, oh, and then we'll press enter. So I typed then and I pressed enter. Let me see if I can just drop this down a line. If it's going to not like that. It sure does not like that. Let's see if I drop and then press space. Okay, that seems a little better. So we're saying if hit and hit.parent, meaning, so I'll put a couple oh, it won't let me. Oh, it sure will. So if hit, so the part that touched the checkpoint exists, I guess. And then parts parent exists. And then the last thing we're checking, hit.parent find first child, which is going to look one time and say, hey, it has this child, or it does not have this child. So if it does have this child of a humanoid, then let's do some stuff. And what we're going to do is find the player from that humanoid. So we're going to say local player equals game dot players, which is a service that we get from game. So game dot players, use a colon, and we could say get player from character, because that hit is a part of our character. It's like the left foot or the right foot or maybe a hand. And so what we'll do is say hit.parent, which is going to be the character that we need. And then that'll give us back the player. And now we can do some cool things with that. So let me zoom out a little bit so you can see it all in case you need to pause. And so that's local player equals, and then we get the player. And so then we could say local checkpoint data, which probably doesn't exist the first time the player hits, but that it will after, and I'll show you how. So local checkpoint data equals game dot server storage, which is that folder. If we collapse a couple of things, we'll see server storage is that folder here. And so we're going to say game.serverStorage find first child, right? Same thing. It's going to look for this child. Um, it's only going to look once, and if it does exist, it'll return it. And if it doesn't exist, then our checkpoint data variable will be null, and we're going to just call it checkpoint data. So let me just try to minimize this a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Still didn't work. Let me get rid of this whole side. Now I should be able, there we go. Now you can see the whole thing. So local checkpoint data equals game.serverStorage, which is that folder we have over here. And then find first child checkpoint data. And now we need to see if it found checkpoint data. So let's go ahead and write that in a comment. Um, check if we found checkpoint data. So if checkpoint data, basically. And actually, um, we don't want, we need to, okay, so basically, if we did not find checkpoint data, we need to create it. So instead of saying if we found it, let's say if we didn't find it, and we do that by saying if not checkpoint data. And so now that we have if not checkpoint data, then we're saying if it doesn't exist, now we need to make it exist. So we're going to say checkpoint data equals instance.new, and that's going to create something for us. And we're just going to make it an object value. I guess we'll make it maybe a folder or a model. Let's just make it a model. So instance.new model. We'll just make it a model. We're going to give it a name. So checkpoint data needs to have, the name that we were searching for up here. So we'll just copy it just to make sure definitely we get it. And I'll put it in quotes, like single quotes or double quotes is fine. All right, so we're saying if not checkpoint data, then let's go ahead and create it. Finally, we need to set its parent. So we're going to say checkpoint data.parent equals game.serverStorage. And that should kind of make sense because we're looking for a child in server storage. We're looking for a child called checkpoint data. And now we're saying, hey, if it doesn't exist, we need to make that child. So we made a model, named it checkpoint data, and we parented it to game.serverStorage. So the next time this runs, this should be true for that player. Okay, so below that if statement, go ahead and pause actually if you need to catch up a little. Go ahead and pause, and then we're going to move on and we're going to actually fill in that checkpoint data. for the character. So, or for the player. So if not checkpoint data, we create checkpoint data. So let's get out of that. So you have to be outside of that first end. Excuse me. And under here, we need to get the actual kind of checkpoint. What would be the actual checkpoint data? So checkpoint data is a model that's going to hold these values. So this is going to be, we'll call it value. We'll call it checkpoint value. So local checkpoint value equals checkpoint data, and then we're going to, again, find first child, which when it was first created, there are no children. But for the purposes of this, we're going to say find first child. We can just use this simple toString, which anything you throw in there, it'll come back and it'll just make it a string, and that'll be player.userid. So we got player up here using game.playerService. And so, uh, we are going to look inside checkpoint data for this first child, which its name is going to be player.userid. If it doesn't find it, we need to do something. So we do the same thing. We could say if not checkpoint value, then. And that's the same thing as above. We're just saying if this does not exist, then we need to create it. And so we can create it by saying checkpoint value equals instance.new, and here we can use an object value is fine. We're going to name it. We're going to name it the same way we expected it to be named above. So we'll say checkpoint value dot name equals, and then the same thing, toString player.userid. And so that'll name it how we expect it to be named, and then we need to parent it. So we're going to say checkpoint value dot parent equals, and we're going to put this inside of that checkpoint data. So checkpoint data. And so that puts it inside of here. And so now server storage, at this point, server storage has a model called checkpoint data. Checkpoint data has an object value called the user ID of the player. And now we can do some things to this. So now that we have that there, we can say player.character added, which is if the player dies, then when their character comes back or respawns, we're going to do something. And so we can connect another function, and in the parentheses there, we're just going to say character because it's going to pass us that when this function gets called, and we're going to just kind of give it a wait, which will break out and not block. And then after that little wait, we're going to say character wait for child. And now we're going to wait for this humanoid root part. Okay, and then we need to set its C frame. So when you change it, that's just how you can move a player from one side to the other or anything like that. We're going to modify its C frame, which is its position and rotation. So we're going to say C frame, capital C and F. So C, F, both capital, and then finish the word frame equals. This is going to be a long one, this sentence, and we can definitely try to break it down a little bit, but this is kind of what it's going to look like. So we can maybe press enter and say game.serverStorage dot checkpoint data, which is what we named it up here. So dot checkpoint data, and then using like a square brace, we're going to say toString player.userid, and then we could break out of there of the square braces, and then say dot value dot cframe, and I'll explain all this here in a moment, plus vector3 dot new, and then in parentheses we're going to say 0, 4, 0. Nope, not 40, just 4. Okay, And so let's kind of talk about this for a little bit because that is a whole bunch to kind of look at. So C frame is their position in the world. And so we're saying when the character gets added, let's move them somewhere. And so where we're moving them is to the last checkpoint, which is, this checkpoint we're kind of operating on. And so we're going to get their last checkpoint based on their user ID. We're going to get its C frame and we're going to add 4 above it. So we're going to plus vector 3.new. And this is going to spawn the character right above the checkpoint and then they'll kind of fall on it. So this is if this user or if checkpoint data doesn't have this user for this checkpoint. All of that's going to happen. So now when we break out of these ifs, so inside of if hits, we still need that, but not inside of any of the rest of these ifs. So come out 2 of those ends. The first end is for like that function that we connected to character added. The second end is that if not checkpoint, right below that end. We're just going to say checkpoint value dot value equals checkpoint. And that's all for that one. So go ahead and pause. Here, I'll scroll to the top and I'll leave it here for about 10 seconds. Then I'll scroll down a little and leave it here for about 10 seconds. And then I'll scroll to the end. Oh, that was the end. And I'll leave this here for about 10 seconds. And you can go ahead and pause to get caught up. And that covers this one. So the next one we need to do is like a script loader. So inside of server script service behaviors, let's go ahead and add a script loader. So this will also be a script. We'll rename the script checkpoint script loader. So this is going to load that checkpoint script. So basically we need to kind of find a reference to that checkpoint behavior. Behavior. Then we need to go through, just like we've done before, go through all descendants of the workspace and find checkpoints. And then when we find checkpoints, let's add the behavior. So easy as that. And the reason why we're doing it this way is because I don't want to have, 3 checkpoint behavior scripts on 3 checkpoints, because if there's something wrong in one, then we have to find all of them and fix them. So this way we have one script, and then at runtime, we copy it and we put it everywhere it needs to go. So let's get a reference to that behavior. So we say local behavior equals game.serverstorage dot loadable scripts, which is that, here, let's see if I can scroll over. That's this folder here. And then we're just basically looking for checkpoint behavior. So now we have a reference to that behavior. Now we need to iterate through all the descendants. So local descendants equals workspace get descendants. And then just like we did before, we'll say for I, and I don't know, we'll just call it part is fine, in I pairs descendants do. And what this is going to do is iterate through each one. I will be the index, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then part will be the actual part that we care about. And so we just need to check. We need to say, hey, is part.name checkpoint? If it is, apply the behavior. So we'll say if part.name is equal to checkpoint in quotes, because that's how we're checking a string match. So needs to be spelled exactly like your checkpoint in the workspace. So we'll say if part.name is equal to checkpoint, then, and now we need to clone that behavior and parent that clone to the part. And we can do that simply by saying behavior clone, which is a super cool method that just makes a copy of something. So we're going to make a copy of it. If we use it on the actual one, it's going to actually move it out of loadable scripts. So we want to leave that there. We just want to clone it. So we clone it, and then we say dot parent equals part. And so when this game runs, it's going to, when the server first spins up, it's going to find all checkpoints and it's going to clone this behavior and parent it to the checkpoint. It's exactly what we want. And so this comment we have down here is actually out of place now because what the comment says we're doing has already been done. So let's cut it from here and let's paste it kind of just above that if. When we find checkpoints, let's add the behavior, and that's what we're doing. All right, and the last thing we need to do is test. We need to make sure this actually worked. So I'm going to press play. And that should drop us in without even making it to the checkpoint. We should be able to expand workspace. We should be able to find our checkpoint, and we should see that that script is a child of that checkpoint. And so as soon as this finishes loading, we'll be able to take a look. Yep, so I don't see any errors. That's a good sign. And so I'll expand workspace, and I'll just go to area 2. I'll expand checkpoint, and there we go. I see that it has a checkpoint behavior and a touch interest, which is great. So I'm going to run up there, and I'm going to try to make it to that checkpoint. Might take me a second. Okay, so I made it to the checkpoint. Now I'm going to try to jump off. I need to make this base plate sort of can collide false. All right, then I'll fall through. We also are going to do that this episode too, just to get rid of it. But I should land back on that checkpoint now. That's the important thing. Here we are. So I respawned on the checkpoint. Outstanding. So checkpoint script works. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is that base plate. So let's do it. We will find the base plate inside of workspace, and we need to do two things to it. We need to set its transparency to 1 and can collide to false, so uncheck can collide. And now we have this floating obby. Definitely needed that. Okay, so we have working checkpoints, we have no base plate, and the character can fall all the way through. So last thing we're going to do is publish an update. So you can do that by saying File, Publish to Roblox. We'll just publish it. So go ahead and do that. Publish to Roblox. It'll create, and you'll find your game, and we'll configure game or configure start place. And this gives us our description. And so in this description, we can kind of add like a release note. Like, so at the top, go ahead and put update and then just say the date. I don't know, like 5/25/2020. And so this update, oh, I missed a D. So update, then the date that you did the update, and then we can say what we did. And so we added checkpoints. Yay. And then you would save. And that's how you would update your game. So that wraps up this series for the simple obby. Our next series is going to be like a battle royale game, sort of like Fortnite or any of those, and we'll learn how to make that in Roblox. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.